I hope everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend. If you live in the United States and you had a day off on Monday, I received many emails over the weekend about the debt ceiling and the bill that may have been reached to avoid defaulting on U.S. debt. And many of you were saying, David, why haven't you been covering this? Why aren't you covering this? And it is true, other than I believe it was just one story on the world famous award-winning bonus show. I have not spoken about the debt ceiling debate, controversy, whatever you want to call it. And that has not been by accident. It's been on purpose. And I want to explain to you why. And then I want to hear from you. Does this make sense? Or should I have been talking about it all along? Now, as a reminder, the debt ceiling is the legal limit on how much the federal government can borrow to pay its bills. And importantly, it has nothing to do with new spending. When we talk about the debt ceiling, we're talking about borrowing to honor prior obligations already approved by Congress. So when people want to debate, well, we should allow the U.S. to default because I'm against the Inflation Reduction Act or whatever the case may be. This is not about debating new spending. This is about meeting obligations for already approved spending. And there are 4 reasons that I have made the deliberate choice, and they all have to do with respect for you in the audience. 4 reasons why I haven't been covering this. Now, first of all, the same thing happens every time. And this alone isn't a reason not to talk about something. Things in politics will happen more than once, or at least they'll happen almost identically more than once. But every time the debt ceiling is reached, and that happens regularly because the government runs a deficit, you see Republicans threatening to block its increase unless they get concessions from Democrats. They talk about writing checks we can't cash. They talk about spending cuts. They talk about policy issues, and it creates drama and uncertainty. But it is mostly a political stunt. And I'm being clear here. From the point of view of Republicans talking about defaulting, Republicans know that the U.S. can't actually be allowed to default on its debt because it would be catastrophic to both the American economy and to the reputation of Republicans. Now, if they could get away with it with somehow Democrats getting blamed, maybe they would go for it. But they also know it would be bad for many of their constituents to allow the U.S. to default, and that they would get at least some of the blame, if not all. So they eventually cave and they agree to raise the debt ceiling. Sometimes it's at the last minute, after a temporary extension. It's the same routine time and again. So it's happened many, many times, and it is happening now. Secondly, it's all bad for the American people. And what I mean by that is not the defaulting that might happen, which would of course be bad, but the debt ceiling debate is bad for the American people as a narrative and a storyline. It's not only pointless, it's also harmful. It wastes time and resources that could be spent on actual important issues like new infrastructure programs or getting people health care. Climate change. It undermines the credibility and the stability of the United States as a borrower and a leader in the world. The more we publicize this absurd, antiquated, retrograde system, which gets us to these debt ceiling debates in the first place, the dumber we look on the global stage. It's unnecessary. It creates volatility and risk in the financial markets. That hurts everybody. Even people not in the markets, just straight up consumers. It increases the cost of borrowing for the government. That adds to the debt burden even more in the long run. And according to some estimates, the debt ceiling crises of 2011 and 2013 actually pushed interest rates up somewhere between 0.5 point and 2 points, costing taxpayers billions of dollars. So I don't want to participate in worsening that situation. Number 3, they eventually come to an agreement. Despite the theatrics and the grandstanding and the brinkmanship and the entire thing, both parties know sooner or later you're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. And what they try to get in the meantime is screen time, which I'll get to, or concessions, which may or may not actually make any sense. They can't afford to let the U.S. default on its obligations, which could trigger a financial meltdown, a potential recession. They also don't want to face backlash from voters at the end of the day and from businesses who would suffer in such a scenario. So they strike a deal. It involves some minor concessions or compromises. the concessions or compromises aren't significant enough to say that's why it was good that they were holding out. And it fundamentally changes nothing about the fiscal situation or the underlying situation in which we find ourselves. And lastly, it's an attempt for politicians to cynically get attention during negotiations. Look at how many stories there were about McCarthy's heading to the White House to meet with Biden, and then they're sitting there. The debt ceiling debate is not actually about fiscal responsibility the way Republicans love to claim. It's not really about economic policy either, because the policies that get us to this situation every however many months also aren't being discussed in any serious way. It's about posturing and messaging. Can I get a meeting with the president? Can I, as a Republican, accuse Democrats of being fiscally irresponsible? Everybody's trying to score points with the base and attack their opponents. And I guess get some leverage to maybe get some extra concessions or advance their agenda somewhere else. Some Republicans have been trying to link the debt ceiling to blocking the infrastructure plan or reversing some Biden executive orders. So the reasons that I haven't covered it are because in order to cover it in the way that it is mostly being covered, I have to insult my audience by pretending that there is something different going on than the exact same thing that always goes on. And it becomes a distraction from more important, urgent matters that affect our lives and our future. Now, I won't deny if the U.S. did default on its debt and did not raise the debt ceiling, it would be not only globally chaotic, it would start to affect individuals who are waiting on certain government payments and in other situations. I don't deny that. But the point is, I don't believe that that's actually at risk of happening for any significant period of time, more than a few days. At the end of the day, what could I possibly add to the normal debate about the debt ceiling? This segment is the real analysis, which is it's an analysis of the way that the debt ceiling is discussed, the way that the debt ceiling debate is portrayed in media and used cynically by our elected officials. But there's really nothing for me to add to that. This is the real analysis. Agree or disagree? I want to hear from you, and I haven't been covering it fundamentally out of respect for my audience.